Welcome back to ICC. We are here with our recap of round 8, and it was once again all eyes on Team India. On the top board, they managed to defeat Team Iran with an astonishing 3.5-half win. The stars were Gukesh and Erigaisi, as they each brought home the full point, and so their respective rating performance increased to over 3,000 in this tournament. With those wins, they're both knocking on the doors of the prestigious 2800 club, and it is no longer a question of if, but a matter of when. The future is clearly very bright for the Indian squad, but the 2024 Olympiad is still anyone's game. India may hold a 2-point match lead over its competitors, but if things go their way, with 3 more rounds to go, still anything can happen. Last Olympiad champions Team Uzbekistan defeated Serbia 2.5-half. The top seed Team USA are back with a win against France. And local heroes Hungary also striked again, this time against Team Armenia. With that being said, let's dive into the best of the day section. It is simply not a full recap if we don't have at least one game from Team India, so today we're going to begin our overview of the open section with Daneshvar facing Arjun Erigaisi. So here, Bardia has just played the move Rook F to C2, trying to gain counterplay on the open C file. White's position is already pretty sad though. The king on h1 is exposed, the bishop on f1 has nowhere to move, the queen on b4 is also kind of out of play, but his main problem is something else. It is the pawn on f3. With a black pawn on f3, it's extremely difficult to protect your king side, and eventually this becomes too huge of a problem to solve. Still, the game is not over yet, and Arjun Erigaisi needed to find a precise way to convert a winning position into a full point. So here he played the move f2, immediately emphasizing the point that the f-pawn is extremely strong, and it is one of the most dangerous weapons black can use. The idea of this move is to be able to include the bishop with f3 and simply bring more and more pieces into the attack. Rook g1 is also on the table, and if the queen somehow manages to get in, probably via f7 and f4, it will be game over on spot. However, it is not easy for white to find a solution and counter all of those threats. A move that at first glance appears to do so is bishop g2, but it doesn't lead to the desired results, as black is able to continue the attack with the move rook to f3, hitting the pawn on h3 and threatening checkmate. The point is that in the case of king h2, black would be able to deliver checkmate after the sacrifice rook takes g2, king takes g2, and queen h3 mate. Apart from king h2, there doesn't appear to be another way to defend h3, so bishop g2 is simply not a good idea. But white's alternatives aren't much better either. So in those situations when it appears that everything is bad, you have to at least go for the active option to give your opponent a chance to get scared and make a blunder. So that is what the young Iranian did, playing the move rook to c7, and hoping that in the case that black queen moves, then maybe things wouldn't be so bad. White will play king h2, then maybe queen e7 will be on the table, and there might be some tricks which white can use to save the game. Well, Unfortunately for the player with white, Arjun Erigaisi is an extremely talented tactician, and he doesn't win, and he doesn't miss a chance to score a flashy combination. So here he went for the continuation, rook g1 check. After the forced king h2, Black finished the game in style, picking up the bishop on f1 and taking advantage of the fact that rook f1 is not possible. Because, well, queen c7 will pick up material and the f2 pawn is still on the board. So, seeing all of that, Daneshvar picked up the queen on d7, the best move in the position, but still not quite enough to save the game. And after rook to c1, rook d6, white resigned the game. The problem was that here in this position, it is impossible to prevent the f-pawn for queenie. There aren't any tactical resources either, because in the case of rook g7, king takes g7, queen e7, the king manages to hide away on g8. Well, on that high note, let's skip to the next game of the open section. On the board, we have another masterpiece from today's round, a win with black by Super GM Aronian versus GM Maxime Lagarde. So here, it is pretty obvious that black is going all in for a king hunt. White has just played the move king f3, as he's hoping to find a safe haven for the king and get rid of all the annoying checks with the queen. Well, it may be hard to believe, but this king was on c1 only 3 or 4 moves ago. And it doesn't appear like its journey to f3 has brought him much safety. In those positions, though, it is extremely important to play dynamic, and you just cannot let the king escape. You have to constantly create threats, which is Levon obviously did. He played the move rook to g8, cutting off the white king, making sure it never gets to a safe spot like h3, and also assisting the black queen, as he's preparing to give more checks. The check on g2 would be devastating because, let's say, in the event of h5, after queen g2, king e3, rook e3, white would be forced to play the move king f4, and he would lose a ton of material. That's why he simply cannot afford to let the queen go to g2. Maxime played the move rook f2. Oh, sorry, not h5, but here, rook f2, blocking the way of the queen and hoping for the best. The game continued with queen b1, making sure that the rook on d3 still cannot move because of the pen, and also trying to transfer the queen to the king side via h1. White doesn't have anything better to do than to take on h7 and probably pray. So the game continued with queen h7, queen h1, king f4, and the march of the white king continued. Bishop e5 check, king f5, and queen g1. The move queen g1 is absolutely remarkable to me. It creates a threat as it's attacking the f2 rook. It also protects the rook on g8, and also, again, wants to deliver checkmate. So it is really what we call multifunctional. White continued the game with king to e6, and then we proceeded with queen g4, rook f5, and bishop d6. The idea of bishop d6 is that it opens up the way for the queen so that from e4 it can deliver a devastating check. The game continued with rook f3, making sure the rook is protected and there are no double attacks at least. But after rook e8, king f6, rook f8, white resigned. The reason was that in the case of king e6, queen e4, rook e5, queen takes e5 would be checkmate. And in the case of the move queen f7, it will be too much for white to handle after rook takes f7, takes, and queen h4. The position has zero hope for white, as it is inevitable that the pawns are going to advance and probably queen. Well, a stunning win for GM Levon Aronian, who is now on track to gain an individual gold medal on his board. Let's wish him luck and continue with our recap. The women's section also delivered plenty of thrills today in round 8. Third seed Team Poland defeated top seed Team India 2.5, 1.5, and created a three-way tie for the first place with Kazakhstan and India. But that's not all. Teams like Ukraine, USA, and Armenia all won their matches convincingly and are just one match point away from the leaders. In today's upsets of the round, the formidable Azerbaijan team was held to a draw by Italy, and Bulgaria managed to escape tough positions to tie their match with second seed Georgia. I would very much like to use this chance to congratulate my fellow Bulgarian girls on strong play and wish them luck in the remaining 3 rounds of the Olympiad. On the personal triumph story side, young talent continues to shine in Budapest. All but one of the top competitors on the individual boards are in their teens. The only exception is veteran by chess standards, 21-year-old Carissa Eep, who is killing the competition on board 2. With that remark, let's go and check out the best of today's games. For our first game of the women's section, we have an innocuous-looking endgame which happened in the match India versus Poland. Here as white, we have GM Vaishali who is facing GM Monika Socko. So here, the last move of the game was king to f7, protecting the pawn on e6 and including the king to a more active position. Well, here, it is white actually who has to fight for a draw. Vaishali is down a pawn and needs to find a way to steer the game towards an equalish endgame. So her chance lies in exchanging the c pawn for either the d pawn or the e pawn, and then hoping to get a 3 versus 2 endgame on one side. However, it is not as easy to achieve that. In the game, the move that followed, rook to c5, was not the best course of action, but the white position objectively still had resources. As white, Vaishali was supposed to go for something slower and more passive like rook e3, where in the case of king e7, c5, rook d5, making way for the king so that the d pawn is not captured, c6, d6. Maybe here white would be able to achieve a draw after trading the c for the e pawn and counting on the fact that the d pawn is too close to the king and it wouldn't really be possible to promote it. But this is still tough to play from a practical point of view, and Vaishali didn't want to sit and wait. So she went for a more active approach, playing the move rook to c5. She's hoping to bring her rook to the 7th rank and also support the c pawn from the front. The game followed with rook b2, taking under control the important 2nd rank and cutting off white's king. Rook c7, king f6, and king h2. So it might seem counterintuitive at first that the white king is heading towards the edge of the board, but it really is just a transitionary period, let's say. The king is headed to the center, but has to find a way to get there, and it wasn't possible through f2, so it's going to be through h2 and g3. The game continued with rook c2, putting the rook behind the pawn so that it's impossible to promote it, king g3, and h5. This move proved to be very, very important in the next couple of moves, as it created a deflection for the white king, because of which black was able to win the game. The game continued with rook c5, and here the move that played was h4. But before we continue with that, let's see why d2 and threatening to go rook c1 doesn't work. In the case of advancing the pawn, white would have the resource to go back king f2, and after rook c1 defend the rook with king e2. The exchange of rooks wouldn't lead to anything, and here it is safe to say that white has almost managed to make the draw. That's why the move h4 is so important, because it aims to deflect the white king, bring it to a position that's not desirable. After h4, white has several choices. In the game, it was king h4 that happened, but king f4 was also objectively possible. The problem with king f4 is that this time we're not going to go for g2, where the king would be just in time, but instead we would capture the g2 pawn. And it turns out that the king on f4 might even be a bit unsafe. Let's say we continue the game with rook c7. Then the game could end very, very quickly with the moves e5, king e4, and rook d4 mate. But even without that absurd move like rook c7, white's position is still completely lost, with no chances of ever saving the game. That's why Vaishali took the pawn on h4. But here the problem is that after d2 and rook c1 on the next move, white is not in time to prevent the queening of the pawn. The rook on c5 is too far away, and in the case of rook b5, rook c1, rook b1, black would still be winning after taking the rook and promoting the pawn. Now, this game turned out to be extremely important because the Poland versus India match ended with 2.5, 1.5. So congratulations to Monika Socko, and let's see how the rest of the round went. Another game I want to highlight today is between two young prodigies from Uzbekistan and USA. As white, we have woman international master Umida Omonova, who's been having an incredible event so far. And as black, we have international master Alice Lee, who is actually the top performer on her board. Let's see. So here, black is a pawn up, but this is actually the least of white's problems. The knight on b1 is stranded, the rook on f1 is only trying to get into the game now, the king on e2 is not feeling super safe. It's just a lot of tiny problems that add up. In this position, Alice continued the game with knight g6, saying, I want this bishop from f4 out, and then I want to go rook h2, pick up some more pawns, and convert it to a win. So the game continued with bishop g5, rook h2 check, king d3, e2. This move might appear risky at first, because what is going to happen if white plays the move rook to e1? Would black be able to defend the pawn? Well, she actually doesn't need to. She can play the move knight to e5, where after king e4, she will simply put the move h3 on the board. the h pawn can also queen. There's no set rule on which pawn should black win the game with. So the next moves would be like rook g2, h2, rook g1, and it is inevitable that white will win the game. Going back, that's the reason why Umida didn't go for the move rook e1, but instead preferred the move rook to f6 check. Now, even if this is a double attack, the problem is that white doesn't have a time to capture one of the pieces, because e1 would be a queen. So the game continued with king to e5, king to d2, preventing the pawn from queening, and here Alice played a magnificent move to seal the deal and force white to resign. She played the move bishop to e3 check. The point is that in case of bishop takes e3, white will surrender the exchange and then the h-pawn will turn into a queen over the next couple of moves. But also, in the case of king takes e3, e1 is getting an extra free queen. Anyway, I feel like this was an incredible endgame technique by Alice, and with that, we're off to see one more endgame before we call it a day. The last game I want to show you from today is from the Georgia versus Bulgaria match. I want to show you how my friend and former teammate, woman grandmaster Victoria Radeva, saved the day and the team. Let's see how she did it. In this position, Victoria is playing black versus GM Nino Batsiashvili from Georgia. So she's already in a tough situation, being down 2 pawns. However, the opposite colored bishops on the board give her a practical chance to save the game. So she just played the move king to f6, hoping to catch the h6 pawn and somehow make a draw. In this position, white is objectively winning, but it is hard to find the precise continuation when you only have a couple seconds on the clock. And for this reason, GM Nino Batsiashvili played a move that actually results in a draw. But let's see how was white supposed to play and why would it be winning. The clearest path to the win is to go for h7, deflecting the black king away from the defense of the f5 pawn. So game could have continued with king g7, bishop c2, and in this position, black has 2 choices, whether to take king h7 or to go bishop f2 immediately. Let's see what happens with bishop f2 first. So here, white would play bishop takes f5, bishop c5, trying to stop the d-pawn, and game could have continued with g4, let's say f2, king g2, and one of black's problems in this position is that she cannot move the bishop. If she moves the bishop to this diagonal, then d6 would be coming, which is a problem, obviously. And if she moves it on this diagonal, then the f2 pawn will be hanging. So here, if white manages to capture the f-pawn, then she would simply continue marching her king all the way to the c-file or anywhere else from where she could support the d-pawn. Eventually, that would help her win the bishop and achieve a easily winning position. So that's why black is forced to play a waiting move. She needs to go king h8, but that's still not enough. Game could continue with king g3, f2, king g2, king g7, g5, king h8, g6, just making some moves to get to the point faster, king g7, and bishop d3. So the point of this move is that white protects the f1 square so that she could free her king and then go help her pawn. The deflection is never going to work because if black sacrifices the pawn on f1 at any point, she will not be able to capture on g6 because the h-pawn will queen. So basically what I'm saying is that this position is completely and utterly lost for black. It's just a matter of time. So for this reason, bishop takes f2 does not save the day for black, and the better practical choice is to go king takes h7. So here the game could continue with bishop f5 check, king g7, d6, bishop f2, and king g4. The point is, while black is trying to stop the d-pawn, let's say with bishop b6, white will capture the f3 pawn, and the d and g pawns are sufficiently far away so that the black king cannot stop the g pawn and help his own bishop stop the d pawn at the same time. So trust me on this one, we're not going to waste any time, but this position is easily winning for white. She would march her king all the way to the d-pawn and eventually win the bishop. However, what happened in the game was slightly different. In this position, white went for the continuation of g4. It is the same idea of opening up the way for the king and picking the f3 pawn, but there is one tiny detail which makes white's efforts futile. So after f takes g4, king takes g4, bishop takes f2, we don't have a g and a d pawn. We instead have a d and an h pawn. And the unfortunate detail for white is that the h pawn queens on a black square, so that the bishop from b3 cannot support its weight. So the game continued with king takes f3 and bishop c5. So in a couple of moves, the players agreed to a draw here, because the problem is, even if white manages to capture the bishop for the d-pawn, this would still be a draw. Let's see. Let's say the position continues with bishop e7, king e5, bishop f8, d6, takes, and this is still a fortress. The black king is going to go back to h8, and there isn't a way to get it out of those two squares. If the king comes, then nothing's gonna happen, because if white gets too close, it will still be a stalemate. So this draw was a huge relief for me and for the Bulgarian team. Congratulations to the Bulgarian girls and to everyone who won their match today, and see you in our next video here on ICC.